Hey.
Hey Gunjan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. I'm three people are messaging me that they're getting a glitch.
We have guests on the call. Can you send me the link as well? Some panelists are not able to join still.
Yeah, sending. I put it here on the chat window. So if anybody is having a problem in joining and you're getting messages, people can just type the ID and that will log in. The link is giving some error for some reason.
Can you write the ID here then?
How many participants do we have till now?
Hi, morning. My name is Aarti Khosla. Sorry, we are 2-3 minutes on top of the hour, but we will give people 2 more minutes to join. I think there was some issue with the link and some of us faced problems logging in. I think some of our panelists are here. Hello, Navroz. Are you able to listen clearly and are you able to speak as well? Can we check once?
Yes, I can hear you fine, Aarti. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't see anybody on the screen, but I can hear you fine.
Oh,
now you're on. Now you're on. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Bijal Ben. Morning. Can you hear me well? Great. I think let's just give 2 more minutes and then we will begin. Okay, I'm sending you the link again. Okay, okay, yeah. Navroz, may I check the link that I sent to you just now? Did that work?
No, I didn't. The way to do it, Aarti, is to tell people to hit the big blue join button and just paste the meeting ID directly into the box, because the link doesn't work.
Got it.
Just paste hit join on Zoom and then paste the ID directly into the box.
Oh, thanks. Morning, everyone. I'm really sorry. This is Aarti again. I think Gunjan, you also typed the email ID in the Zoom ID incorrectly over here. Can you please type the correct one? And very sorry for the panelists who have joined in time. If you allow me 30 more seconds, I will come back to you. Hello, everybody, and my profuse apologies for starting 10 minutes late. I never thought this will be the beginning of a green recovery webinar series, but here we are. We have had some issues with Zoom, and I think as we can solve it, the green recovery discussions will be able to solve themselves as well. But let me get going. We've consumed a lot of time. Thanks very much for joining us for the first of the discussions on green economic recovery. Simply put, what we want to discuss is, are there possibilities for India to develop and grow in the next couple of decades while also keeping the emissions low? And it's very clear that the COVID devastation, both on the health front as well as on the economic front, really needs no introduction and needs no discussion. But even at that time, even at such a time, what is happening to the economy and what are the implications of that are quite huge. Therefore, there are a few questions that we thought we would like answers to. First of all, can growth in the next decade or so come while not destroying or impacting natural resources? Second of all, is it possible for development to happen while also keeping traditional fuels like coal, oil, and gas in the ground, and how much, and ramping up clean energy? And thirdly, is it possible to be able to bring back better, build back better, and do so while also including rural economy as well as urban resilient infrastructures? We understand that these are wide-ranging questions with wide-ranging implications, and therefore we don't mean to cover all the ground, but we mean to address some of these issues with respect to climate policy, energy policy in the session today. And at this point, let me also say that we have a very distinguished panel with us today. I will also introduce the panelists to you now and in the speaking order. We first have Dr. Ajay Mathur, who needs no introduction, Director General of TERI, PM's Council on Climate Change, was one of the key negotiators for India at the Paris Agreement. We all know him for the work that he's done with the star labeling as well as with the LED program. Welcome, sir. Due to the problems of not being able to speak right now, I think I will have to stop and then just change the format, but I will do it as I go along. We then have Professor Navroz Dubash. Again, we are all aware of the scholarly work that Navroz has done on climate policy in the last 25 years or so. And he's also the coordinating lead author of the 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Navroz has done a lot of work on climate policy in India, and lately has also been studying matters like air pollution. We then have Professor Christian Breyer, who has done the most number of studies on countries and regions across the world which can turn 100% renewable. And in his work, he also has done a recent study on Delhi and the Northern Grid and the implications for 100% renewables, and Christian will speak to that. He's from the Lappeenranta University of Finland. We will then be joined by Professor Cameron Hepburn, who's going to join us a little late, but Professor Hepburn is the director of Smith School of Business at Oxford University and runs Vivid Economics. He's been doing a lot of research on what green stimuli mean for different countries. He also advises a lot of countries and institutions like the OECD and United Nations on climate policy. So we are very privileged to have all these, the first set of speakers. The order of the event is that we will first start with a round of presentations by each of these speakers who will present their recommendations on green recovery. After that, we will have a panel discussion, which is going to be led by founder of India Spend and well-known journalist, Govind Ethiraj. At that moment, we will also be joined by Bijal Brahmbhatt. Bijal Ben is the director of Mahila Housing Action Trust and has done some very remarkable work on looking at urban housing and also low-cost climate resilient housing, and I think will really both speak from the ground and from the heart in terms of what needs to happen when we talk of big ticket items like green recovery. At this moment, I will pause. I welcome all the panelists at this webinar. I apologize once again for the glitch and the never-ending notifications, which I will just pause. A couple of housekeeping announcements. This call we will record. Speakers will make their statements also on record. We have journalists on the call who are free to file stories if they like, but I would just request media to please play back their quotes with experts if you do so. We will have a small poll. Sorry for making use of the captive audience like this, but we wanted to make sure that we get some perspectives from influencers like yourself on what green recovery really means to a range of people in India. Please leave your comments in chat. This is a webinar, so you might not be able to speak unless you're a panelist. So if you write your comments in the chat box or raise your hand, we will be able to pick it up. And please keep yourself mute when you're not speaking. Without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aarti. I think you would need to enable my video, but that's besides the point. What I wanted, Aarti, is to focus on both the aftermath of the pandemic, the economic slowdown, as well as the kinds of economic recovery packages and the opportunities for green. The way I look at it is that as we move to the year 2050, we are looking at a future in which the vast amount of energy in this country is met by renewable energy on the one hand, and there is a screen in front of me which says, I'm not very sure what it wants me to do.
Sorry, sir, what's the issue? Is it not?
It says meeting topic, host.
We can hear you, Ajay. I think you should keep going. We can hear you.
Okay, so let me keep on going. So at the heart of it, we are looking at a future in which the energy is met by renewable electricity and is met by hydrogen. And the hydrogen is also coming from water, which is split using renewable electricity. So hydrogen and renewable electricity are at the heart of the energy system of tomorrow. This is 20, 30 years from now. So what are the actions now, especially in the wake of the pandemic, that make sense? Every country in the world, India included, is focusing on three things as part of their recovery packages. They may be doing more, but these are three things that are in common. The first, obviously, is that they want to encourage economic growth to grow and grow very fast. But the second is this should be economic growth which helps create jobs. So that's the second. The third is it's not just jobs which are flashes in the pan, but jobs that are sustainable. So economic growth, job creation, and sustainable livelihoods are the three goals of almost every recovery package that I have seen. If you look at the Indian recovery package, there is a certain amount of cash transfer which is provided for people in vulnerable jobs and is provided for provision of food to vulnerable people. given the kind of fiscal space that the Indian budget has, this is relatively limited. The vast amount of the recovery package, or let me say the stimulus package, has been provided as credit, and particularly as credit to two sectors, agriculture and small and medium enterprises. So these are the two sectors where the government feels that there is an opportunity for, obviously for economic growth, but also for job creation and sustainable livelihoods. These are also the two areas where the largest amount of entrepreneurship and therefore sustainable livelihoods occurs. So these credit possibilities have been put in place. There have also been credit guarantee mechanisms that have been put in place. In addition, there is the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund that has been created. As we look at all of this, now the question is, how do we ensure that these are used to establish the kind of actions and the kind of directions that are needed in order to move to a future where we move towards renewable electricity and hydrogen. I would argue that in order to make this happen, there are two more things that are needed. One is green equity. People can take credit, but you can only take credit if you have cash which you are putting in as equity. There is a dearth of equity both in the farming sector and in the SME sector, and therefore the availability of there I am. Now I can see myself on video as well. And therefore the availability of green equity would help these entrepreneurs to invest in green options. And they can draw in the credit that is available in the economic stimulus packages. That is the second advantage. The other thing which we need in an emergency basis is skilled manpower. And therefore I believe that skill development and skill certification wherever needed, but skill certification tends to be time consuming and costly. Therefore, green equity and skills is where we need to go. Will this be useful? Let me give you an example. If you look at the cold storages in this country, 2/3 of the cold storages are around urban areas. Only 1/3 are in rural areas. Why? Because the reliability of electricity supply in rural areas is very poor. If you want it to work, you would have to go in for diesel genset-based electricity generation. And cold storage, very expensive. Thankfully, now we are at a time in history when renewable energies are much cheaper than they were earlier. Let me give you an example, and this is based on a real example which I and my colleagues had the pleasure of working on. Near Lucknow, there is a cold storage that has been set up in a rural area, which stores mangoes, and those mangoes are provided to Walmart. The cooling system used is an ammonia-based system, again, very, very well known. It needs heat. But the heat is now locally provided by biomass wastes that are put in a biomass gasifier, which we had provided. And that gasifier converts it into a gas which is burnt, and the heat is generated to operate the ammonia absorption chiller system. Now, the point I'm making is investment in reliable electricity in rural areas helps create a whole platform of activities which help in economic growth, which help in job creation, which help in sustainable livelihoods. In short, as we look to the future, it is important that we start focusing on what we can do today. And in my view, there are opportunities as long as we can get green equity and make it available. You know, the SME and agriculture sectors are such that it has to be ultimately available at a very decentralized level. Therefore, using block development officers, using the investment officers in banks, which are the lead rural banks in districts, or in the lead banks in the SME clusters. That's how you reach the the SME and the agriculture sectors. In my view, moving through these, making the skills available are how we can turn this opportunity into a green opportunity, move towards a future that, as I said earlier, focuses on renewable electricity and hydrogen. Thank you very much, Aarti, and thanks also to all the panelists who are here. Navroz, I heard you there. I also saw a chat message that you said, so wonderful to see you. But I am sure that there are others as well who are friends.
Thanks, Dr. Mathur. In the interest of time, we will keep moving as of now. And may I request you, Navroz, to please come in and talk a little more about what you see at the interface of economic recovery and climate policy. And we can see you as well. So it's working finally.
Great. Thank you so much, Aarti. It's always a pleasure and a bit of an intimidation to follow Ajay, but I will do my best. So thank you for hosting this event. I actually would like to start by kind of pulling back the lens a little bit. You know, in the immediate post-COVID moment, there was a sort of flurry of webinars and activities and research reports on what one should do about a green recovery. There was lots of sort of effort to, in a sense, make sure that we did in fact build back better. And I think we're now in a moment that is a little bit more sobering in two ways. One, the COVID crisis is, in India at least, seems really long drawn out. In the rest of the world as well, but India, we are not perhaps making the headway that everybody hoped we would in terms of the number of cases. And therefore, attention continues to be very much focused on the here and now. And the second is that, of course, we now have data on the economic costs, and they are absolutely disastrous. India is among the worst in the world, some 20–24% decline in the last quarter, which again puts a lot of emphasis on the short run. So we are at a stage where we should not fool ourselves. It is going to be very hard to get policymaker attention for a green recovery, and we have to be very strategic and smart about it. So that's sort of a context setting point. The second related point is there is a real sort of disconnect, I think, with the international conversation. The international conversations I'm part of, and we'll hear a little bit from Cameron Duncan a little bit later on. There are lots of great ideas doing the rounds, but I think many of the ideas assume more fiscal space and fiscal flexibility than in fact is true in India. And perhaps in other developing countries. And we have to actually ask ourselves, green recovery under fiscal constraints. How do we do that? Because that's really the context we face. And so international conversations are still about, oh, look, the NDC, there's for next year, we should be updating and making our NDCs collectively more ambitious and so on and so forth. I think there will be a time and place for that, but really, I think there's too much uncertainty now. And the international community, I think, needs to take their foot off that particular accelerator for the time being. Anyway, we don't have a COP this year. So we need to be thinking about how do we use this space. Of course, in the long run, the direction of travel has to be the same, but I'm not sure it helps right now to be asking a country like India, tell us, you know, by December, what your ambition levels are going to be. At the same time, there's a disconnect between the conversations globally and in India in another way. We've seen images of wildfires in the Western US, followed quite soon after similar wildfires in Australia. We have examples of hurricanes. We see lots and lots of examples of rampant sort of growing immediate signs of climate change. And that is not actually playing a role at all in India's domestic debates. Instead, we're having debates about diluting environmental standards in the EIA notification. So there's lots of disconnects that we have to bridge. I'm sorry to go on at some length about this, but I think that is the kind of context within which we're working. So given that, I think there are two principles that should guide our action going forward. And I will eventually come to something more specific, Aarti. The two principles are, one, we have to look for opportunistic moments to stimulate a recovery, and as Dr. Mathur put it, make sure that we have job creation. we have the kind of economic shortfall that simply cannot go unaddressed. So we have to look laser-like for things that simultaneously create jobs as well as create a more green economy, and look for that overlap as relentlessly as we can. And second, we're going to have to juggle the short term and the long term. So we do have short-term pressures, and it's useless to pretend that we don't. At the same time, we have to maintain some space for the long term. So I'll give you an example. In the short run, some of the things that we have already committed to pre-crisis, we must do. So for example, the Finance Commission has set aside money for the national clean air plans, and making sure that we invest better in monitoring equipment and so on. That is investment in the long run. That sort of thing shouldn't be delayed or postponed, right? Because it will pay a greater cost later. On the other hand, I think we have to think about what the long-term opportunities are. And I think where Dr. Mathur was his examples of giving, many were things that will take a little bit of time to yield fruit, but we must not take our eye off that ball. Those kinds of ideas I completely agree with. Let me in particular elaborate on one that he talked about and add my voice to that. So this idea that we have now, that the power sector is actually in a very interesting place, because we have now strung out electricity line to many parts of the country, but we don't have good quality and reliable power going down that line as yet. And that could actually massively improve the productivity of rural economies if we are able to solve that problem. So we now have to shift gears in the power sector to thinking about what we're calling in CPR productive power. And there's a brief by my colleague Ashwini Swain on this. So productive power would say it is about actually thinking about the power sector through the lens of what increases rural productivity. That potentially also takes pressure off the migrant economy. So we are dealing with a structural issue of a very high migrant dependent economy by focusing on productive power. And there's various things we could do. Dr. Mathur has given some examples, how we stimulate cold chains, how we bring in green equity, skill development, and all of those I think are consistent with this idea. But that is kind of the vision, is productive power. The second thing that we could be thinking much more about is crop choice patterns. So we have a rural economy that has been shaken up. That's not a reason to shake it up more, but should we be thinking, for example, about whether it makes sense to have crop patterns that continue to make use of resources in scarce areas. So for example, rice cultivation in Punjab and Haryana, where you have migrant labor having to come over for transplanting and for harvesting skilled migrant labor from the east. Should we be thinking about revisiting not just agricultural marketing, which is what the debate is right now coming out of the stimulus packages, but should we be rethinking the MSP system, the minimum support price system as a whole, to try and steer crop choice in a different way, right? We have the chance now to think about those larger third rail issues in politics, because the system has been shaken up so much. Not to say it'll be easy, politically very challenging, but I think we should actually put those kinds of things on the table. The last example I will give, and I'm giving kind of big broad brush things, so productive power, crop choice. The third is urbanization patterns. People have got used to, so a small proportion of urban dwellers, professionals, but they tend to be high energy users, high transport users, and high private transport users, have shaken up their patterns of work. What do we do about this, and how do we factor that into urbanization in the future? Are there patterns we want to encourage? Are there patterns we want to discourage? What does this mean for future patterns of urbanization and mobility, including things like these sort of Zoom conferences? I can easily imagine a future where investment advisors, for example, who crisscross the city, meeting sort of new emergent middle class investors who go in person, that might become a more virtual kind of interaction. Built on top of a personal interaction. How do we encourage these kinds of patterns, keeping in mind the need for also that in-person interaction is very important socially? How do we rethink urbanization and urban mobility, given the fact that it has been shaken up already? So, just to quickly conclude, then the idea is we have to focus on some short-term things. There's no option, and we should actually communicate to our international interlocutors that we really don't have any option but to do that. At the same time, we have to preserve some space for these long-term structural changes, making sure that they don't, of course, put more stress in the short run. And the kinds of things I've talked about, productive power, crop choice, urban patterns, are three areas where we could really build out ideas in a more convincing way. Let me stop there, Aarti, and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Navroz. I think it's clear from what you and Dr. Mathur have said that there are some implications and there are less options, but at the same time, there are some opportunities as well that, you know, we must seize at this moment. I am sorry again that due to the issues with the Zoom today, we have a situation where we are not able to put the video and sound for our other two panelists. I will welcome, meanwhile, Professor Cameron Hepburn from Oxford University and Professor Christian Breyer from Lappeenranta University, Finland. Maybe what I can do right now, Govind, if you're online, can I invite you, because I know Bijalben and Navroz and Dr. Mathur are all here. So if that works, how about you please start talking, you know, on the panel discussion that you have to host. And meanwhile, I will try and fix the sound and video for the other two panelists, if that's okay. And sorry to just, you know, cut this short like that, but I will mute myself and sort a few issues. And meanwhile, you please take over.
Thank you. Okay, I will try and do my best, given that it's sudden and somewhat short notice. Anyway, so let me pick up Dr. Mathur and Dr. Navroz Dubash. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Both of you are here. Okay.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Yeah. Do you want us to start our video?
Yeah, that would be good, because then we can have a conversation while Aarti figures out. Yeah. Okay, so let's pick up on I think the couple of points that Navroz and you said, that, you know, there is a need for so policymaker attention, I think, as you were saying, is tough when in this current environment where we are clearly lagging, or we've not fully come to grips with what's happening on COVID. So, and let me contrast that with what Dr. Mathur has been saying, that, okay, here are the 3-4 things we need to do, including decentralization, you know, rope in our vast network of banks, investment officers, bring in equity, provider. So is there a contradiction? I mean, and let me just pick those 2 points first, and then we can build between what we need to do and what we can do. So Dr. Mathur, do you want to go first?
So I don't think there's a contradiction. I think the point remains that we have got very narrow windows of opportunity. And I would like us to utilize those windows of opportunity. In my view, those windows of opportunity occur when we move in those directions where it makes economic sense today, because policy attention is difficult to draw. So where is it that makes economic attention? Those places where electricity today is either unreliable, or where the cost of energy is so high and it needs to be reduced, SMEs, for example, which is why renewables in the rural areas and energy efficiency in SMEs makes great sense. These are the opportunities. Now, the issue is these opportunities have existed. How do we grab them? And therefore, in my view, if there is green equity available at the level of SMEs or at the level of farmer organizations, the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund talks about this group of people or whatever it is, then we have an opportunity. But we will need to focus and focus deep enough in order for this opportunity to be fully utilized.
Right. So I'll just take a step back. You know, I mean, since I can see that there are some other media folks, maybe who may not be specialists in this space. So you are connecting renewable as the electricity as the driver of sorts for the green recovery process. Among, I mean, there could be many things, and
especially,
so maybe
especially in the rural areas. So
would you like to spend dwell on that a little more as to why you feel this is the key platform or driving?
So, we've had a suboptimal agricultural sector because of the lack of reliable electricity. Cheap electricity has essentially meant that we have pumped water, but that's all. If you move into agricultural processing, the reliable supply of electricity becomes most important, and cold storages is just one example of agricultural processing. There are many. For many farmers, the lack of good marketing and the lack of facilities where they can store their foodstuffs becomes a huge problem, and they have to take suboptimal prices. Right now, today, for example, there is such an excess of bananas in the market that farmers are having to take prices which are 10 to 20% less than they were at this time last year. On the other hand, if there were good cold storages, then green bananas could have been stored and put into the market at a time when prices were better. So in my view, the availability, the reduction in the prices of green electricity has provided us with an opportunity to also enhance incomes, create jobs, and provide sustainable livelihoods.
Okay, so Navroz, can I come to you? So, I mean, one of the key points that you're making is that we should not forget what we started out on, including, let's say, efforts on the National Clean Air Plan. Now, you also mentioned that the financing for that is in place. Is the financing in place given where we are otherwise fiscally?
So just to elaborate on this, the amount of money that's actually been allocated is to the National Clean Air Plans are very small, but there has been an allocation made from the Finance Commission, which is quite substantial. And that is basically a good use of that would be to build out the kind of monitoring infrastructure. Now, mind you, there are flaws in those National Clean Air Plans. They're not sort of uniformly something to be celebrated. They're too limited and so on and so forth. But all that said, everything else being equal, it would be important not to be distracted from that task. Because at the end of the day, while we are in the middle of a massive crisis here, let's not forget that the air pollution crisis has all kinds of negative multiplier effects in terms of making people most likely more susceptible to COVID, right? So you don't want to take your eye off that ball. Long-term health effects that we've heard about in all the sort of media uproar over the last few years, and so on and so forth. So you don't want to completely distract attention from some of those long-term ongoing crises. And as I said, the Finance Commission money that has been set aside, we should be using that. We shouldn't be completely taking our eye off some of these bigger structural long-term problems.
And what's your sense? I mean, to come back to the point, so let's say renewable electricity in the manner that Dr. Mathur defined is one hard focus area for the coming 6 months to a year. So how are you seeing it? I mean, maybe this is a more intangible question rather than a tangible question, saying that, okay, if we are going to be preoccupied with fighting COVID-19 and will be more preoccupied by all signs, is there going to be a trade-off? Is it likely a trade-off? If there is, then how do we calibrate ourselves for it, given that these objectives are secular and long-term?
Yeah. So I think as I was saying, the first point of work should be to identify areas where the short-term recovery and the long-term building back better agenda potentially go together, right? And there are very few of those, but there are a few. One of the things that interestingly many groups have been writing about of late is whether there's an opening to shut down some of the older coal-fired power plants earlier. And that may be, I mean, there's pushback against that as well, but I think the question now is to move to a case-by-case, state-by-state discussion, right? You obviously don't want to, at this point, cripple your power sector and make yourself unable to fund a recovery, or to power a recovery rather when it comes. But all the analysis seems to suggest that if you actually shut down some of the older coal-fired power plants, you will actually increase the you will improve the economics of the newer, better functioning and cleaner power plants, as well as provide more scope to renewable energy, which might also start seeing a hit from the demand shortfalls.
Right.
And that then has positive knock-on effects for the banking sector, which is holding the debt of all these stranded coal assets. So those are the kinds of things that I think we could actively do now.
Right. Okay, Aarti, I'm going to hand it back to you in a second. There's just one question that I thought I'll throw to Dr. Mathur, which has come from Kavita Shrikant, who asks, can it be expected if the international climate financing would lessen given COVID? Would the focus have to be more on domestic finance? Is it fair to expect incremental funding on environmental issues, or should the focus be on more on reallocation or better reallocation of existing funding?
I tend to look at funding from a relatively narrow standpoint of financing. Yes, there may be incremental costs, but the short point is that if what is being offered for the investment is a remunerative return, then people will invest. So let us see whether they get a remunerative return or not. Clearly, from the grid-based electricity systems, people are getting remunerative returns, and that's why they're investing in it. The banks are investing in it, but more important, equity is coming in. It is those kinds of instruments that need to be created, particularly by the financial institutions, especially the banks. If you're able to do it, what all the numbers show is that the credit will be largely domestic, the credit part of it. The equity will be partly domestic because it is the promoter who will put in the money. But the large part of the equity will have to be international. Now, if you've got a remunerative package, attracting this international capital is difficult in these times, but it's not impossible. So I argue that if we are able to provide today in this country a package that is remunerative, we will get equity to invest in it.
Okay, hope optimistic note to end on for now. Aarti, so back to you.
Thanks, Govind. We are back with Professor Christian Breyer, and also we have Professor Cameron Hepburn. So welcome once again. I think you both can see us, and we can also see your video. Maybe I will first allow Christian to come in, and Govind was alluding to economics of the power sector, and how Navroz spoke about how we cannot leave this economic crisis unaddressed, but at the same time each of the panelists have stressed about the importance of jobs and to provide more jobs as we go along. Christian, you've done a study which analyzes how both jobs as well as a clean transition can come for the northern grid, and more importantly for Delhi metropolitan area as well, which will be of interest to a lot of participants here. Would you like to present some of the top lines of your research? And may I say that I'm sorry for the time that we wasted, but could you please limit your first remarks to about 7 to 8 minutes? Thank you.
Excellent. Sure, I will do so. I just share my screen with some good luck. It's not possible that it can be seen. Hopefully you can hear and see me. Excellent. Okay, so let's use the minutes to give a brief overview on what our energy transition option, also for a green recovery, for the case of India North, what we just did in recent time. Executive summary is available if you look for it. If the presentation is later on available, there is then also an activated link. So the key questions are that the present fossil fuel-based energy system has multiple limitations, in particular climate change, also air pollution, high cost, the water crisis, and more. And now is the question, what would be the key characteristics, features of a renewable energy system for India North, but also Delhi? And of course, also will be a kind of a realistic time frame, because we're talking on an energy system in its total, and what would it mean for jobs? India North, as everyone knows, are just here the states as shown. And for the specific case of Delhi, we have the outstanding challenge that in the area of Delhi, it will be not possible to provide all the renewable energy which is required. However, in a cooperation model with neighboring states, that is very well possible. The present situation is in the northern grid that more than 60% is coal-based, also a reason for air pollution, and of course not matching, at least in the midterm, the climate change requirements. Versioning the water crisis situation. So this is just the starting point, how we did it. We used just a model which integrates all the sectors, power, heat, transport, and in particular also self-production for prosumers and on the roofs whenever possible. So what we find as the first result is that the overall primary energy demand can be stabilized for several periods, because the entire transition is done until 2050, and several periods means the present energy system is really not efficient. Not efficient means the average of thermal power plants, average efficiency like 35%, so a lot of the energy is lost. When we think on combustion vehicles, only a smaller fraction, so let's talk about 20%, is used for powering the wheels. So a lot of primary energy is simply not used. In the renewable system, the efficiency is much higher means typically factor of 3. In the second diagram on the top, one can see that finally a renewable-based energy system is practically electricity-based, and that can be used for all forms of energy. Electricity can be easily converted, whether it's industrial process heat, it can be converted even with electrolyzers and hydrogen and further synthesis units to all hydrocarbons we use today. So jet fuel is possible, and other fuels or chemicals. In the end, what we need is low-cost electricity and water and air, but water only limited if it's needed for conversion. And as a consequence, having a fully renewable system, greenhouse gas emissions can be brought down to 0. In the long run, of course, more energy demand is needed simply due to raising standards of living and continued growth of population. What does it mean for the structure of the energy system? In the energy system, it's an outstanding resource, solar resource, which is available in India North. And finally, the main feature of the system is it's a solar-based system, strongly supported by batteries to make it running on a day-night cycle. And of course, with electrolyzers to bridge, in particular, also the transport sector. I have to mention our model is done on full hourly resolution, so all hours of a year are captured with real historic weather years, and also 1 hourly resolved demand. So from that point of view, it's an all-hour matching system, and this is then a kind of a solution. Also, the heat generation would not grow that drastically than electricity generation, and most of the heat is also industrial process heat, but of course also in the more colder areas used for space heating. The question is, if such a system would be technically possible, what does it mean for the cost? The overall system cost, of course, would increase somehow due to more energy demand. However, in the end, the levelized cost of energy are relevant. So energy means all the annualized system cost divided by all the final energy demand, independently whether it's electricity, heat, or fuels. And there you can see if we would take greenhouse gas emission cost out, which might be introduced in future more, but if they will be taken out, then you can see the system will be stabilized from the total system cost, but the fuel share would continuously go down, and in the end it will be an investment cost and operational cost driven system. Bottom left, you can see the required capital expense, so that will be really substantial, will be a strong push for respective activity. I mean, for jobs, really good news, around about 3 million in the energy sector could be increased to 5 million jobs. In particular, more jobs in stable renewable energy activities. So this is also, I would say, a really good news. Going for renewables, we can further increase the jobs situation. What does it mean from an energy interconnection point of view? As you can see here in the diagram, so there will be some states where the local demand is not that large, or where there are, for example, excellent hydropower conditions, so they will be available for export. Export means when the black generation circle is larger than this pink demand circle. However, when it comes to Delhi, there will be a strong import without any doubt due to the limited area. And here you can see on the left-hand side, the current just relative proportional structure of energy supply in Delhi. It's fully fossil dominated, also coal dominated. And as a consequence of the transition, and of course it can be boosted with a recovery program, so I think that will be best option. Then step by step, we would see some more bioenergy, in particular waste. So there are local wastes available, which can be used for energetic purpose. And then more and more solar. From the import share, of course, this is also something what we know from today, but that will be further increased for the required area. And now let's already come to my summary. First of all, a fully renewable energy system with zero greenhouse gas emissions is possible for the entire northern grid, including Delhi. Solar photovoltaics and batteries will be the most prominent energy technology of the future. This is the real asset of India, of entire India, of course also India North, to have excellent access to excellent sunshine on super low cost. Greenhouse gas emissions can be brought to zero. The costs are very well manageable. They would further decline. Being based on a least cost energy system, more jobs can be created. And finally, a more efficient overall energy system and economy can be created, also matching the Paris Agreement. It has been a great pleasure to give this presentation, and I'm very open for all the questions. Many thanks.
Thanks very much, Christian. And I think more than anything else for Delhiites, it will be quite a respite to know that, you know, one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world can literally be stabilized by a lot of solar and PV in the coming decades. And apart from other benefits, you know, the benefits that it will also bring of just living in a livable city. And I think some of us witnessed, you know, clean air very closely for the first time in many decades during the lockdown. And therefore, I think there will be a lot of appreciation for just long term. And I noticed you said a number of 5 million jobs in the renewable sector, which in and of themselves are quite huge, and at a time when, you know, a lot of discussion is centered around jobs. But let me keep moving. We will come back when Govind will have a discussion with you very soon. But at this point, let us invite Professor Cameron Hepburn, who's done an analysis of what green stimulus should be, and specifically also in the context of how countries should be investing if they don't invest in coal and what those options are. I'll leave it to you, Professor Hepburn, for the next 7 to 8 minutes to talk about your research in the context of India. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Artie, and thank you, everyone. It's very nice to see some familiar faces here, and I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, so we've been doing a large global study on the question of the economic recovery, and in fact we started from a general point of view before looking at some specific green policies, and have found that those green policies are both rather popular and rather effective from an economic lens. You just heard from Christian, lovely presentation, an extra 2 million jobs in renewables. That isn't surprising when you look at the underlying numbers, that you get kind of 2 to 3 times as many jobs per megawatt hour from the clean energy generating sector than from the fossil. So that's a very good example and a very optimistic but realistic case. So let me whiz through a few slides here and then engage in the discussion. I guess you could summarize our finding with the following. When you're in a recession or a depression, you obviously need a Keynesian stimulus, and as is often noted, digging a hole and filling it in again is not such a bad thing to do in a recession. We're really saying if you're going to dig a hole, you might as well plant a tree in it before you fill it in again. And so the paper that we published with familiar economists to you, I suspect, Nick Stern, Joe Stiglitz and others, is in the Oxford Review of Economic Policy. I've shared a link there. But one of the fascinating pieces of context behind the paper, and one of the reasons that I spent the last 3 months permanently attached to Zoom calls, is that there are huge majorities around the world of citizens who want a green recovery. They want to see the clean air preserved, Artie, that you mentioned, and they also want something good to come out of what is really a pretty awful disaster. And it is right at the top of the list. in terms of, at least according to this Ipsos Global Advisor poll, and I'd be interested if others think that's different here. And so there's huge desire and political mileage in taking this action, which I find very encouraging. I'm just going to do three things in my remaining 5 minutes. I heard Navrosh talking about the potential synergy between the kind of rescue packages and the recovery packages. And I think that's a very good way of thinking about this. As it happens, what we've seen so far around the world is that the rescue packages have tended to be not green, but not brown. I mean, basically colorless, to coin a phrase. But the economic recovery packages, they are looking considerably green, actually, which is quite reassuring. Although, of course, there are some things that you rather wouldn't have seen, including in India, I might add. The scale of the emission reductions that we've seen in the last few months is actually what's required year on year to get us to net zero by 2050. And that, for some people, is proof that we'll never get to net zero by 2050. For others, it shows you what can be done when there is the need to do it. But it also, for me, tells us the importance of the sort of things that Christian was just mentioning, that this is about technological change as well as behavior change, and getting these new cleaner technologies into place rather than locking down economic output in order to save the environment. That's clearly not something that is sustainable or desirable. So that's the short-term effects that we've been engaging with. The crux of our paper is around the medium term. We surveyed 230 central bank officials and finance ministry officials from around the world. Before doing that, we put together a database of 400 stimulus packages from the previous financial crisis onward. That database is publicly available, and it now has over 1,000 different policies. We created an archetype of 25 different policies and then surveyed these officials as to what they thought of these policies in terms of overall desirability, long-run economic multiplier, climate impact, and the speed at which those policies could be implemented. And what our findings are summarized really most simply here in a single slide. The finance ministry and banking officials liked healthcare investment, probably unsurprising for in the middle of a pandemic, and quite sensible. That's M, very large, desirable, can act quickly, good economic multiplier, neutral for the climate in their views. So remember, this is a survey, not necessarily reality, but it's interesting as an indicator of what these officials are thinking. But I just highlight these 5 or 6 here with the darker rings, because they're all effectively green recovery policies. And as you can see, there are policies that tick all the boxes effectively. So connectivity infrastructure, so that we can have these kind of conversations. Many of the things that Ajay and others on this conversation have already been talking about are in this mix, where that can deliver on multiple goals. So building out your clean energy infrastructure, thinking about your natural capital, your resilience to climate impacts. You know, these are large-scale investments that are very labor-intensive, create lots of jobs, and also leave you with better stock of capital and assets at the back end. So in pulling all of this together and looking at the literature as well, we highlighted these 5 sets of policies. Now this, of course, is kind of generic and at a global level. It needs to be scaled down to specific national contexts. And you know, I'm actually not going to pretend to have the local knowledge that you have. So, but at the global level, this clean infrastructure, building energy efficiency, education and training. You know, if you've got tens of millions of people unemployed, this is a great time to develop the skills that they need in stable jobs for the future, not skills that they might have in unstable and insecure jobs in the fossil sector, and so on. So now, just before I end, I just wanted to take you through where some of these other recovery packages are emerging just in recent weeks and a couple of months. And what's quite interesting here is just how much money is going into the push on decarbonizing and protecting natural capital across Europe and parts of Asia thus far. And there's many recovery plans still to be announced at scale. Arguably, there's more to come from India. But what's striking about this is I think you need to bear in mind the shifts this will have on the technological landscape. I noticed a question about biofuels in the chat. If you have a look at the spending on hydrogen over time, from 2016 through to today, what we've seen is just a massive step change in funding, pulling down the costs of hydrogen effectively. Now, it would be stunning if that doesn't have an impact on the overall economics and shift the feasibility of deploying technologies like this at scale, and this is happening across the board. So look, let me stop there because I'm at 7.5 minutes, and I look forward to sharing more ideas and discussion shortly.
Right, thank you for that. Ati, can I take over? Or? Yeah, okay. So can I come back to those points, Mr. Cameron? You said that the EU is more than $400 billion of green spending, and many other countries in pretty significant numbers. So is this money that was allocated a long time ago? Is it what's been the timeline for all of this?
So it's a great question. It's always a good question to ask of any politician. And I think quite a lot of it is genuinely new. So if you look at the German stimulus, you're talking a few tens of billions of euros that's clean, that looks new to me. Of that, 9 billion alone is going to hydrogen. If you look at the French announcements, and the numbers are just so big on hydrogen that they kind of have to be new. I mean, they weren't spending anywhere near that much beforehand, and you saw the numbers at the global level. So I think in a way, it's a good cynical question to ask, but an even better cynical question to ask is, will it actually be spent? Because you can announce something and actually delivering on it is another thing. And I suspect at the EU level, not all of that money will be spent. At the national level, more of it will be, because there's certain conditions and hoops that have to be jumped through to access the EU funding. But even if only 50% of it is spent, this still makes it the biggest clean stimulus on Earth ever, and significantly bigger than what we saw in the last financial crisis. And I would guess that significantly more than 50% of that will actually go out the door. So it's pretty significant. Even with a cynical lens.
And this is something that is the outcome of people who have been able to put their heads to this in this period of time. For instance, the point that was earlier made by Dr. Navroz Zabash was that, in India, for instance, maybe we don't have the mind space to focus on this because we're still grappling with COVID. I mean, not focus on everything, but at least on a few things. And are you saying, I mean, from what you're saying is that politicians or those who are leading this agenda in Europe and many other countries, including in Asia, have somehow had the mind space or found the mind space, and of course the money to put aside?
Yeah, I mean, they're both great questions. I think when you look at the opinion polls, politicians tend to find mind space for something that 81% of people want in due course. And of course, even in Europe, the stage one was not about a clean recovery. It was about rescuing livelihoods, making sure that businesses that were otherwise solvent and profitable didn't go under. And we saw, I guess, close to 10 trillion globally being allocated just in rescue packages that were not really about thinking about the structure of the economy in the future. So, I wouldn't be too hard on India just yet. But what you do need to do is to make sure that in those rescue packages, you don't prop up industries that are, where their time has come, to be frank. And you're reorienting your economy, because there's an awful lot of investment that's being brought forward here. On the financing point, as you say, you can't just throw money at an economy forever and not expect inflation or other issues to bite you. So it needs to be spent sensibly now. The financing issues are not really yet on the table. They're starting to be discussed in the UK, in the developed economies, but they are, of course, front and center. You know, we've been working with the African Development Bank and others where there just simply isn't the fiscal space for these kind of numbers. And there the challenge is, how do you reorient the animal spirits to get your economies going without, you know, strongly dipping into the public finances? Of course, there are ways of doing that too, because it's about guiding your private sector and making sure that, you know, the risks are minimized in the areas where you want capital to flow.
Right. Let me put this to both Ajay Mathur and Navroz, and maybe Dr. Mathur, you want to go first. So the other point from Cameron's presentation, that, you know, a large number of citizens want green recovery and want something good to come out of this whole, of this whole episode. So how do you see that, Dr. Mathur? I mean, I don't know whether we have any more granular understanding what people want, and if people want something, will that translate into political response? Are you here? I don't know if Dr. Mathur is hearing me, but Navroz, I think you're on, and the question is for you as well.
Sorry, just to understand the question, you basically want to know whether we see that sort of political impetus in India?
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that, so, I mean, the one is that a large number of citizens, I mean, this is based on a survey, seem to want a green recovery. Yeah. I mean, this is Cameron's presentation, and want something good to come out of the COVID experience and everything that we've suffered. So one is that a likelihood here? And if so, then how does that translate into political policy response? And then I'll come to the funding part as well.
Right. So I think, first of all, if I remember this survey right, it's been a while since I looked at it. Cameron, perhaps you can correct me. I think the sample was not very broad and deep from the developing world. So I don't think we have a very good answer to that question from the developing world. But please correct me if I've got that wrong. But putting aside the survey, I think there is enough evidence that people would like to see a cleaner, healthier environment, particularly around things like air pollution. We have other surveys that show that. What we don't know well enough is, what do people think when they are informed about potential trade-offs between environmental outcomes and livelihood outcomes, if there are in fact those trade-offs? Now, I think it's a tricky question because it's a question of time frame, right? So so in the long run, we know that actually these are mutually supportive things. The question is, in the short run, if you're short of money, are there going to be trade-offs? Which is why I can put it much more elegantly than I did. Looking for synergies between the recovery and rescue packages, I think is the political comfort zone. I think nobody's going to disagree with that. And I don't think we've fully exploited that political comfort zone as yet. Once we move beyond that, I think it becomes a question of unpacking the political economy. The recent debates we've had in India about the EIA notification are really instructive. We've had 2 million comments pushing back on the perceived dilution of environmental standards in the EIA notification. At the same time, business has been they haven't been that vocal, but the assumption is that they are basically saying, if we are going to actually generate jobs fast, we need all kinds of SOPs and we need barriers to be removed. Again, I think it's an untested contention, but right now I don't see a groundswell of the sort that we would like to see, saying we're all in favor of a green recovery.
Right. Dr. Mathur, I don't know if you're back with us. So I just wanted your comments on, the kind of funding that we're seeing. Again, Cameron spoke about the hydrogen R&D spending, for example. I mean, there's a lot of money, some of which seems to have clearly emerged now. So any lessons for us, takeaways?
Well, Govind, I think there are 2 points to be made here. The first is that for the first time in history, we are seeing a hydrogen demand emerging. Now, note that hydrogen has been used in the fertilizer industry and in the ammonia industry for a very, very long time. But that hydrogen has come from gas. As we look at green hydrogen and we see its use in other sectors, heating in industry, for example, or steel making, for example, then we are actually looking at price points at which they become competitive with gas-based hydrogen and with whatever is being used for heating today, which is largely coal. So the key thing is that with India having these kinds of demands, there is now a push also for supply to meet certain price points. We've had a long discussion about hydrogen in this country, but it's always been from the supply side. And once you talk from the supply side, and if you don't have price points which you want to reach, then it doesn't get you anywhere. The Department of Science and Technology and the Department of Biotechnology have started hydrogen programs as part of the international mission innovation process. And my feeling is that you will see over the next weeks and months that the Indian investment in hydrogen would increase as a result of these demands. And because we now have supply mechanisms, particularly renewables and renewable energy being utilized for the splitting of water to create hydrogen.
Right. Okay. Christian, I think you want to come in, and I'm going to go to Bijal Brahmpat after that. Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, sure. Many thanks for raising the point on hydrogen. So hydrogen is something which is really important. It's not really new. What is new is the fully focus on green hydrogen. I think that is the first time that we have a realistic, real discussion on hydrogen. And when it comes from a system efficiency point of view, whenever we have a direct electric option, this is typically the lower cost and more efficient option when it comes to cars, when it comes to direct electric heating purposes, when it comes to storage and other things. So that we should have always in mind not to move into a kind of a hydrogen discussion, wishful thinking bubble. So the all electric option should be always first. However, then we have corners in the energy system where all electric is no way forward. So this is in particular for long distance marine, long distance aviation. It comes to chemicals, so ammonia and fertilizers have been mentioned, where it might be even one of the first large, huge markets. What we have also found would be green ammonia that would come up in different parts in the world. The first larger projects we already see right now. So that is really of very high importance, and one of the next major industries will be steel industry. There we can substitute coal with hydrogen, and then we would have, if it's green hydrogen, really green steel. So that will increase or will establish really large markets. However, we always need to have in mind when there is an all electric option, this is in practically all cases lower in cost and has a higher efficiency. So we need less area, less capacity to run these activities.
Right. Bijal Brahmpat, may I come to you? She's just joined us. She is the director of the Mahilas Housing Saver Trust. And how are you seeing this from your vantage point in as a housing and urban housing and urban expansion and habitat improvement point of view? Bijal, are you here? Can you hear us? Okay, so let me come back.
Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I did hear you, Govind.
Okay, so the question,
So
no,
my
I just wanted.
perspective is going to be from poor self-employed.
Go ahead, yeah, absolutely, yeah, go ahead. I just wanted your broader point of view. I mean, whether you, do you want to see it from urban housing or employment, and I mean, around the issues that we've discussed in green recovery?
Yeah. Yes. So So it will be from the perspective of poor self-employed women who are working in the unorganized sector. And we have been working on housing and climate change. And I want to talk more about the heat, energy, and water nexus, which is happening, and the policies that are currently existing for the poor unorganized sector in India. For example, what we have been seeing that the government has the housing for all mission, and we work for housing, let me say, because some of these most of these informal sector people use their house as their workplace. So either it's their go down or their storehouse, or it's a workplace itself. So I think housing and energy are linked, and housing is also very, very, very clearly linked to their productivity. So we were concentrating on the affordable housing mission of the government. And what we suddenly saw is that when the people moved from a slum to an affordable housing unit provided under the Housing for All mission, their electricity consumption increased about 4 times. The reason that was, one was, of course, their aspiration. And second, the heat generated into that kind of housing was so much that they started consuming more and more electricity since it was available. So the key question is, how do you use the Housing for All mission to generate housing which increases the livelihoods of these poor in a manner that the electricity consumption is lessened because the heat is lessened. So how do you, in essence, increase the thermal comfort? The second thing that we have been seeing is that the government, the power ministry has an energy conservation code, but that code is essentially only available for commercial complexes, and it's available for residential complexes now, which are bigger than 250 square meters. Which again means that it's not available or applicable to slums where there is a lot of incremental housing going on. And again, it's not applicable also to the affordable housing. So how do you really bring these policies down to, to the urban poor who constitute quite a large mass and 40%, 35% of India's population over the coming years? Especially, I think what is going to be challenging is the small and medium towns, where we are also seeing as one of the larger impacts of climate change, water scarcity emerging. In the smaller towns where we have been working, I have seen water being supplied once in 5 days or once in 20 days. And, they actually really, in a town called Amalner in Maharashtra, they actually pump water from the Tapi River, which is in Surat, about 20 kilometers away. And which really essentially means that when you're pumping water from there, you are paying an electricity bill of 22 lakh rupees per month for a small medium town, which has a population of 100,000, in total. So it's going to really become the heat energy nexus for this poor. And are any of these, policies going to flow down to the unorganized sector who are essentially self-employed themselves? They don't have an employer-employee relationship. So those are some of the key questions where we have been working. And one thing which necessarily doesn't concern electricity, but does concern hygiene. And when we say build back better, is that, though the Swachh Bharat mission has done quite a lot, I think, the glass is still only half full. And you cannot consider, hygiene or COVID going away with people using community toilets, which are the source of, COVID expansion, and people not having access to water at their doorsteps in cities just because they live on informal land. So because you're living on an informal land, you are considered as an informal citizen. No, you are a citizen of India and you are a formal citizen. But because you're living on informal land, you just can't get access to a toilet at your household level or water at your household level, which is the key question that, that we are working on. With that, I'll stop.
Okay, thank you for that. So let me bring Cameron and Ajay and Navroz. So so we've not talked about the demand side. And there is a question here from someone who also asks about shouldn't we be focusing on consumption as opposed to, let's say, the generation, which obviously is resource intensive and so on. So do you want to go first, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say certainly in developed economies where there's an awful lot of prosperity as it is, very significant levels of consumption and very big environmental footprints, thinking through those consumption levels makes an awful lot of sense. My sense, though, is that for large parts of the world and in parts of India, there is still enormous economic welfare to be gained from increasing material consumption. And ultimately, people want to live more prosperous lives, so it's desirable for them. It's probably going to happen whether you like it or not. And so critically, these things are not alternatives. We have these discussions in Oxford all the time. You want to tone down excessive consumption where it exists, but also really work very hard on the supply side as well to make sure that you're cleaning up your inputs. And I think the point made in the chat was that, well, doesn't renewable energy cause environmental problems too? It uses resources and so on. And of course it does, but is nothing like the scale of the fossil industry, where you are really digging up vast quantities of material and burning it and shifting it from the lithosphere into the atmosphere at a scale that is reshaping the Earth's climate. So you want to put those two things in perspective. The renewable industry is kind of, mouse-sized compared to the impact on the environment of the fossil industry right now.
Right. Okay. Ajay Mathur, would you like to come in on that? I mean, just talk a little bit about the demand side. The example that Bijal gave, for instance, about how demand has shot up by 4 times. Because when people move to, let's say, urban housing environments, and maybe it'll shoot up even further in future.
I think one of the points that Bijal made, and I think it's important, is that energy demand rises with incomes. The average energy use in India, not supply, the average energy use in India is still about 0.6 tons of oil equivalent per person per year. For any economy that has a human development index of 0.9 or more, an OECD economy, it is at least 3.6 tons of oil equivalent per person per capita. Now, obviously, the countries which industrialized later get lower numbers because the infrastructure that they set in is more efficient. So, but even if you look at that, instead of 3.6, you can look at 3, you can look at 2.6, but we are still looking at least a 4-time increase in energy consumption in India. That's going to happen. The challenge that we have is that 4 times increase comes from non-carbon sources rather than CO2-based sources. Is that happening? Well, it is. The average air conditioner sold in India today is 50% more efficient than the air conditioners sold in 2007. And today, if you go to the market, and I went to the market to buy 2 air conditioners about 2 months ago, 5-star air conditioners are not available. They are just flying off the shelves. The reason is that people understand that managing longer term costs, at least the people who buy air conditioners, and this is obviously the richer people, understand that managing long-term costs is important. But it's not as if it's only happening in homes, it's also happening in industry. We are seeing, for example, and I'll give you an example, about a week ago, for the first time in my life, I saw an advertisement in a normal newspaper on the first page of somebody advertising for the most energy efficient motors that you have, i.e. 4+, and having a table of the kinds of savings that occurs. If you want i.e. 4+ motors in this country, again, there is a waiting list. Why? Because the SME sector is pulling them in. And they're pulling them in because that is what leads them to be competitive and productive. The credit that has been made available through the economic recovery packages implies that first costs are not as much a problem as they were earlier. And people look at the future. People, people are not blind. They have expectations of the future, and they see that the future is one in which competitiveness is drawn from lowering the conversion costs. So we are seeing this move. It's a little bit too early to see the data that would be available globally to be able to see this trend happening. But the surveys that we are doing indicate that we are seeing these kinds of changes occurring. So, Govind, to cut a long answer short, we are seeing changes in energy efficiency. We are seeing fast changes in energy efficiency, but the overall demand for energy is increasing and will keep increasing.
Okay, we're going to come to a sum up set of comments from all of you. But Christian, I think this is a good time to come back to where your presentation left off. That, if you have a really optimistic sounding 2050 target of a completely renewable northern grid, now what will it take? And what are the presumptions that we are operating on, and do those presumptions match with some of those points that we've talked about? Does this post-COVID adrenaline the crisis adrenaline, as some people call it, will it help, or can it drive people to go faster?
Yeah, many thanks for addressing the question. I guess in the very end, and that we have seen all over the world, what is really needed is political leadership. We need clear, dedicated targets that can be clearly executed. And this in particular implies to avoid any kind of stranded assets. So wherever in the world we are, in particular also in India, new coal capacities will not end in a good economic outcome. That we already know from the distressed coal capacity as of today. And that would only, destroy resources which are desperately needed for the real required investments. So from that point of view, clear targets, clear direction, whenever possible, reducing risk. Because we know from investments, the cost of capital is the cost fraction number one. It's not the investment, it's the cost of capital. And cost of capital typically reflects risk. So the point is, whatever could be a political measure to reduce the risk for investors could be of massive help to reduce the output cost of whatever is generated and produced, whether it's renewable or others. And for the specific case of a solar-based system, there needs to be much more emphasis than of uptaking the electricity. So that would be electrification, in particular in the transport, which would have an enormous positively impact on air pollution. Of course, we need more focus on batteries, and in a further step, good opportunities for grids, because in particular for the case of Delhi, even more exchange with the neighboring states is required. And we know ramping up grid capacities takes years, can take many years. So that has to be early in the planning process. Luckily, the cost of solar drastically goes down. And personally speaking, the requirements in India to have more local content is exactly the way forward. That generates jobs, further value creation, and further participation across all different parties and stakeholders, and that helps us all. And of course, we always need a kind of a fair share of benefits. So if we have access to such a low-cost source of energy, then it should not generate windfall profits here and there. It should be for the benefit of entire society.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to get a quick sum up from everyone. Bijal, let me begin with you. So, you've highlighted some very important points on the consumption side. What's the one solution that, for either from a policy point of view or from a consumer citizen point of view, that you would like to leave for us? And I'm going to ask for all of you for that one input before we close today. Bijal?
So what we have been doing, Govind, at a very, very grassroots level, in smaller towns and cities, we have been constituting multi-stakeholder groups. So these groups are actually, groups of experts, technicians, scientists, citizens, poor women, and politicians together. who take up such issues, and then mulling on that, they build up and they bring out local solutions to these issues. And I think these kind of multi-stakeholder groups, where, mind you, not only the poor learn, but also the technologists learn, because not all technologies are applicable to the poor. Yeah, you may have an AC, but a poor person cannot afford it. So the AC is a technology for you and me, but it's not for them. So how do you make actually technologies that can trickle down really to the grassroots is also a learning that the technologies take from the poor when we have such multi-stakeholder groups. And we have been trying out those solutions of having such multi-stakeholder groups so that well-intentioned policies really get implemented and touch the grassroots.
Right. Thanks for that. Navroz, do you want to go next? Your one parting shot.
Sure. I'd like to actually come in on the demand side questions, which I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. I think India is at a very interesting moment. We're not growing terribly fast right now, of course, but we have been growing relatively fast, among the faster growing countries in the world. We have a chance now to lock in infrastructures that lead to cleaner and lower carbon futures. So, I think that is the big difference between the West and us. They have an existing stock of buildings, infrastructure, low roads, cities, et cetera, that make it hard to actually change behaviors. We have millions of people coming into urban spaces, changing their lifestyles every year. We have buildings that are yet to be built. We have cities that are yet to be built. We should be actually using this moment to change the slope of the curve so that we are actually nudging and locking in behavioral patterns that are lower consumption and lower polluting in their effect. That has to be kind of part of our vision. Some of the things that, and that's both the consumption side of the economy, but also the production side of the economy. What Ajay and I talked about earlier in terms of productive power and how do you enable rural industry is of course part of that story. So I think that's how we have to be thinking about things if we possibly can.
Okay, and Ajay Mathur, I'll just come to you after Christian. So Christian, do you want to go ahead? Your last point, or the one point that you want to most emphasize on?
My most emphasized point was just said before. So from that point of view, clear targets, clear execution, and reduce the risk to the investors and have a fair share of societal benefits. And then we can really rush into the solar age. And this is, from my point of view, not only in India, it's also in the entire Sun Belt, the most valuable resource we have. It's not used much, at least not yet for energy. Of course, we use it for bioenergy, for food production, but with very high efficient solar energy options, we can really now enter the solar age to huge benefit. It's in many, many countries already today, the least cost source of energy, where even the second least cost has a factor of 2-3 higher cost. So this is really the way forward to make it possible that all energy demand can be fulfilled and in a sustainable way.
Right, and the term you used earlier was that zero greenhouse gas emissions are technically feasible and economically viable, and that's something that we should keep in mind as we aim for this 2050 target. Ajay Mathur, so let me also take one point from that's come in as a question. Is there a way to more simply and forcefully communicate these important points, that India can get more jobs, not less, that India has a solar advantage if it only takes the green path, and that the larger public, the masses, which can perhaps push this via policy and votes? So maybe if you want to touch on that as well as your last closing comment.
Yeah, so I think I'll touch on that first. I think the issue of communication is extremely important. And nowhere is it more important than where you and I actually spend our money, whether we spend it as individuals or whether we spend it in terms of investments in infrastructure. I think what is most important is, therefore, to reach out to the people who make these decisions and give them real life examples of how they can make a better decision. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. We saw how in a matter of 3 or 4 years, the star labeling scheme in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency achieved the kind of public acceptance that made people change their behavior. I think those real life examples documenting them and putting them in the hands of the decision makers is important. That's the first point that I would like to make. The second point that I would like to make is that we have spoken of the kinds of opportunities. We have not focused, except Navroz, I didn't see anybody else focusing on the kinds of problems that we have. 2050 future is great, but 2050 is 30 years away. What do we do now under the current COVID challenges so that we move in the right direction? What are the nudges that we have so that we take the actions that can take us to a carbon-free future in 2050? I have shared some of my views earlier, I will not repeat them, but let me focus on the one game changer, the deal breaker, and that is the financial health of the electricity distribution companies. I am truly fearful that if the financial health of the distribution companies doesn't become better, they will stop buying renewable electricity. We will start seeing a stoppage of these new contracts. That's the one. The second thing that I am afraid of is the availability of people, skills, which help us replicate and replicate fast. I think we need to look at not just new training, not just retraining, but training of people who are right there. We expand it. So expand the skill sets that are available with the electricians, with the plumbers, with the people who are already there serving both the rural sector and the industrial sector. I think these are the two key issues that we need to look at as we move to the future.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone. I think there are lots of important points and useful points to pick up on, including what we need to do now to get going, including picking up on what we've done already. Plus, of course, using some valuable insights from both users, consumers, voters, citizens, as well as what's been happening in industry on the investment side, as we try and take these investments to projects and regions which desperately need it. So on that note, thank you very much. IndiaSpend has been doing a lot of work around it. I was reminded of the most recent report where we talked about the 50,000 crore rupees that we could save if we were to phase down some of the thermal power plants, because the cost that we would incur in bringing them to environmentally acceptable standards would be much more. Among others, where we've spoken in the last few years about the jobs opportunity, the 5 million direct energy jobs that Christian talked about, and many more jobs that are possible if they were in this whole green energy focus and are already being seen. So let me not go beyond that and hand it back to Aarti with my thanks from me and IndiaSpend.
Thank you very much, Govind. Thank you, all the panelists. I know we are literally quite 15 minutes above the top of the hour. I don't want to extend this any further, but I think it revealed that this is not the last discussion on this point, and we certainly want to discuss some of the issues which were not fully teased out, but definitely remain relevant in what we need to discuss on whether the recovery is green or just simply the fact that how do we preserve natural capital while making sure that growth happens broadly. Thanks very much, Christian. Thank you, Dr. Mathur, Navroz. I know Cameroon has dropped off, and thanks, Bijal. We will see you another time, and sorry for the technical glitch in the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aarti.
Thanks.
It was absolutely wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Aarti. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Navroz.
lot.
Govind, as usual, you were excellent.
Well, thank you so much. The most kind. Thank you.